All right.
I think we should start.
Yes. Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to our last Auxin of the year. If you don't know me by now, my name is Llyod, and I am an advisor at the Center for Teaching and Learning. Yes, so today we have Dr. Llyod Hill, who is going to be presenting our last Auxin on the tension between AI literacy and academic literacies. Before he starts, I have a very short bio that I am going to read out for you. And then I will give you, Doc, about 40 minutes to make your presentation. Thereafter, I will welcome the colleagues to engage on the topic before I take 5 minutes for us to close. So Dr. Llyod Hill is a sociologist in the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at Stellenbosch University. His research focuses on language and communication, language in higher education, and science and technology studies, with a current focus on generative AI within university context. Thank you so much, Dr. Hill, for your presentation.
Thank you, Sim. All right, let me just go back to this. Can everybody see my presentation? Is it large, Sim?
Yes.
All right, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for making the time for this. As Sim says, I have a kind of general interest in language technology, and I have a research history looking at universities. So I must just give a caveat that I don't consider myself an established researcher in the academic literacy tradition. So if there are people who are more established in this field than me, you're welcome to jump on me on towards the end, if I get some of the niceties wrong. But what I'm doing today is I'm teasing out what I consider to be a very clear tension between the kind of very general way in which this term AI literacy is used and the more specific ways in which literacy is thought of within a number of critical schools, of which this one is particularly interesting, I think. So just to give you a sense of where I'm going, okay, I want to talk briefly about AI literacy. What is this? I'm going to refer to a specific text in the conversation, which I distributed. Some of you may have read it already, which I think is indicative of a kind of general treatment of this concept, AI literacy. And then I want to sort of get into very briefly this problematization of the idea of basic literacy and why we see this shift from literacy in the singular to literacies in the plural. Before moving on to what we might call the extension of literacies. We talk about computer literacy, we've even got now a discourse on digital literacy, and so AI literacy is kind of the latest in a long line of what we might call literacy extensions. And I'm going to talk specifically about this research field on academic literacies. And I'm going to end off with a couple of general comments, very tentative, because this is very much sort of how I see it now. And what would a critical AI literacy or AI literacies entail? Very brief ideas that are sort of in my head at the moment. All right, let's go. What is AI literacy? Okay, so a nice place to start with when we have these concepts that are increasingly popular is to look at the Google Ngram, which measures the frequency of words in the massive corpus of books that Google now owns. So here you can see that this term took off around about 2014, 2015. And I think what's significant about this that is it follows immediately in the wake, which are circa 2011, 2012, in the wake of widespread public recognition of deep learning as the kind of latest iteration of artificial intelligence. So we have numerous manifestations and universities increasingly, and I'm not by any chance, by any means, picking on Stellenbosch here. I think there's a kind of a general trend to sort of frame the need for AI literacy, and I think that's understandable. But generally, it tends to be framed in the singular. This is just one example. So in the Stellenbosch University's position statement, you see this reference to, something that's vital for staff and students. to become AI literate, to understand the capabilities as well as the potential risks and limitations of AI tools. And then there's always the sort of emphasis on the ethical use of AI tools. I mean, that's a good starting point for thinking about AI literacy at Stellenbosch in particular. But let's think a little bit more generally. Now, the World Economic Forum, very influential, has stated that this is now a core competency in education more generally. So, what is AI literacy? And I found this article, which seems to be one of the articles that sort of comes to the top of any Google search on AI literacy. AI literacy, what is it? What it isn't, who needs it, and why it's hard to define. And I think it's kind of indicative of what I would call an increasingly kind of general treatment of this concept of AI literacy in the singular. So here's the kind of effective definition. At its foundation, AI literacy includes a mix of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are technical, social, and ethical in nature. According to one prominent definition, AI literacy refers to a set of competencies that enables individuals to critically evaluate AI technologies, communicate, collaborate effectively with AI, and use AI as a tool online, at home, and in the workplace. Okay, so one other section from this piece that I just want to highlight. Who needs AI literacy? Everyone, including the employees and students using it, and the citizens grappling with its growing impacts. Every sector and sphere of society is now involved with AI, even if this isn't always easy for people to see. Exactly how much literacy everyone needs and how to get there is a much tougher question. Right, I'm going to skip over there. There is much that researchers don't need, which leads to the need to measure AI literacy and the effectiveness of different training approaches. So I want to just pinpoint two aspects of this. Okay, firstly, this kind of statement: who needs AI literacy? Everyone. And then this kind of drive to try and quantify and measure AI literacy as a singular phenomenon. So I think what we see here is, obviously, I'm reacting to this particular article. I'm using it as an example. But I think evident in this article is a use of AI that is a lot more general. Okay, the singular use of AI literacy, which is more general than just this article. And I read quite a few sort of popular pieces on AI literacy during the course of the last year. I'm doing a lot of research on AI at the university at the moment. So the first is that on the one hand, there is this kind of broad qualifying definition of AI literacy that typically invokes both technical, social, and ethical aspects of AI use. But the singular concept also tends to be definitive, a definitive concept. Okay, and here this is a concept that is juxtaposed to Bloomer's notion of sensitizing concepts, which are more common in qualitative research. Bloomer was a very influential sociologist at the Chicago School. And I think what we tend to see in definitions like this is firstly this kind of tool orientation. Okay, it's just a tool. We need to use it. We need to use it properly. If it's a hammer, use it to hit a nail. Don't hit somebody over the head. So this is kind of, it's just a tool. It's not what the tool does. It's what we do. And secondly, it's quantifiable. To quantify things, you have to have definitive concepts, right? There's nothing implicitly wrong with definitive concepts. You need them if you're going to quantify. The issue is to what extent a singular concept like AI literacy can be quantified. And secondly, we tend to see this undifferentiated universal application. Who needs it? Everyone. This article doesn't have a sense of, actually, this is a bit of a complex construct. It may mean something different to somebody in physics compared to somebody in English Lit, right? It's just everyone needs it. So I think this is the trend, okay? And this is an example of what I call an extension of the notion of basic literacy. And in fact, that article also uses this term basic literacy at one point. So it might be worth just stepping back a little bit and thinking about why this idea of basic literacy is not so basic, okay, is not as simple as it may seem to many people who are sort of not schooled in the critical tradition. And I think the kind of problem here is that the common sense taken for granted understanding of literacy is something fairly technical. It's a process of using writing in a language. Okay, there's this implicit assumption that languages are real things out there, and that when you're becoming literate in a language, it's a fairly universal process involving decoding, reading, and coding. Okay, and typically we learn it in that order, right? We learn it from we learn to speak first. We don't tend to think of speaking as literacy. We tend to go to school and learn to decode. I'm very familiar with this process now because I have relatively young kids. So why is this problematic? Well, it's a very complicated history of not just literacy, but reading and writing, standardization of language more generally. And it's very clearly tied to histories of nationalism, colonialism. And there are always, whenever you've got a kind of a coding system, there are winners and losers, okay? No matter how egalitarian the society is, not everybody gets access to all aspects of this so-called code. And there's a growing critique of this idea that language generally and literacy as well can simply be thought of as a kind of code that can be learnt in that way. And here's an interesting kind of one influential framing of critical literature: learning to read and write as part of the process of becoming conscious of one's experience as historically constructed within specific power relations. Okay, so there's this kind of idea that learning to read and write is not it's a simple technical process of acquiring a competence. Okay, it's also a process of kind of positioning yourself within a reading and writing context. And of course, our context is the very unequal history of South Africa, dating back to the ravages of colonialism and apartheid. And there is a very kind of poignant debate around this issue in literacy in South Africa. You may not be familiar about this, but there's a debate over this so-called issue of reading for meaning in South African schools. I'm not going to get into it, but here's an interesting op-ed by Maston Prinsloo, who's one of the leading people in this field in South Africa. So that's the issue with basic literacy. So let's explore this term academic literacy, academic literacies. Go back to the Ngram view again, just to kind of get a sense of what we're working with here. The term academic literacies is as in plural is increasingly common, but still not as widely used as academic literacy in the singular. So what's the context for this? Well, academic literacies is a particular relatively narrow research field that emerged in the 1990s. It emerged in the UK, but South Africa was actually quite influential as well. And I think it's significant that it's not very big in the United States. But it also draws on a much broader humanities-based critical tradition. And there are a number of streams to this, but the most obvious ones are critical theory and various forms of post-structuralism, which I might go into. Okay, so there's this article by Llyod, who's one of the very influential people in this field that I distributed. Some of you may be familiar with it, that summarizes this particular research tradition quite nicely. Academic literacies is a relatively new empirical and theoretical field, setting out to explore reading and writing in academia as social practice. The social practice is very often juxtaposed to this idea of a simple technical competency, using ethnographically orientated methodologies and drawing on a range of critical theories. The pluralization of literacy signals an interest in academic reading and writing, not only as diverse and situated in specific disciplinary contexts, but also as ideologically shaped, reflecting institutional structures and relations of power. This ideological concern gives rise to a transformative agenda encompassing individual writers, the conventions and practices of the academy, and the wider social relations in which all are embedded. Okay, so one of the influential distinctions that emerges from this research tradition is this distinction between autonomous and ideological models of literacy. And this dates back to work by Street. Brian Street is very influential, pretty much one of the founding people in this field. Street's notion of autonomous and ideological models of literacy was and is key to the ACLIT's, that's how they abbreviate the field, ACLIT's conceptual apparatus. Autonomous framings of literacy conceptualize it as separable from the context, as a fixed set of skills or competencies which can be possessed or lacked, leading to destructive binary perceptions of learners, as literate, illiterate, and to remedial bolt-on writing pedagogies. Okay, so one of the risks with this kind of distinction between ideological and an autonomous model is that it can tend to be framed as two kind of very distinct ideological positions or two very, very distinct traditions. And the autonomous model is very often associated with this kind of emphasis on skills. You need to get skills. And it can be interpreted as meaning, there's no such thing as skills. And I think this is not really what is being argued. And Lillis made this point, but I found this kind of representation of what is called the tripartite model of academic writing or academic literacies. It's not that skills don't exist, okay? It's just that those skills are not as autonomous as the people who advocate them, the sociologist, chemist, physicist, no matter what. They're not as autonomous as people tend to assume they are. Okay, they tend to be embedded in wider contexts. The most obvious one is academic socialization. It can be in the form of departments, faculties, and these are very important institutions that we build, journals, societies, NRF in South Africa, for example. And then so the wider context, okay, the social, and the kind of micro context of specifically positioned and embodied people in particular contexts that frame whether or not a particular skill is acquired. So I've tried to sort of talk this through by thinking in terms of a discipline, where any given academic discipline really would sort of involve all of those. You have to think about your domain, you have to think about the particular skills you want, but you also have to think about the very real and varied experiences of, say, students, in this case, coming into your class, of very different backgrounds, rich, poor, historically white, historically black, etc. Okay, so this model is useful, I think, for thinking about AI literacy. Okay, and this is where I asked the question, what could a critical AI literacies perspective entail? So a number of issues. And firstly, we are grappling with new technologies. Okay, so mostly they involve what I would call LLM tools, large language model tools, and new affordances of those tools, and associated skill sets. Okay, some of the skill sets are fairly general. You can argue that something like prompt engineering, learning how to prompt ChatGPT is a relatively general skill. But how general is it? There's also the issue of LLMs and changing institutional cultures, debates on transformation at a university like Stellenbosch, faculties, disciplines, and thinking carefully through, the situated use of these so-called tools, risks, benefits. How do we do that sort of cost-benefit analysis? And finally, there's what I would call AI ideologies and the sort of emerging political economy of AI, which I will speak to very briefly. I think I'm going to try and end before the time, so we can have slightly more time to discuss. AI literacy or literacies, okay? Which should we use? Firstly, AI literacies doesn't really exist. in any significant way, as a significant discourse. Lennox, many of you know Lennox is actually doing work on this. I haven't actually done a lot of the research myself, but he has, and he says he can't find anything really on it. I've looked in the Ngram, but just doesn't see anything as well. I've Googled, I don't see much. Does it matter? Okay. Is it that serious? It's not terribly serious for me whether we want to talk about AI literacy or AI literacies in the plural. Okay. Personally, the key issue for me here is crafting some notion of critical AI literacy. And, for me, framing a kind of orientation to AI literacy from within this kind of broad critical tradition in the humanities, which I am a part of. So what does that mean? Well, I think it involves what I would call thinking small and thinking large, okay? Simultaneously, thinking two things at once. And firstly, thinking small means exploring AI and technology more generally, use in different academic contexts. And it's part of the reason why ethnography is used in this field, because it's a very useful methodology in the humanities for doing this kind of work. But then also thinking large, right? What are the larger interests at stake? Political, economic, ideological. And ideological also includes what I would call the kind of the ideologies of the university, the kind of the petty politics of positioning around disciplines and that sort of thing. This is also, it's a kind of ideology there as well, which doesn't necessarily correlate with political ideologies. Okay, so thinking small, let me give you a little example of how I think about this. So I actually ran a survey this year in my sociology of communication module, S242. And I asked students, which sites do you use regularly? I define regularly as at least once a month. And I was very interested to find that obviously ChatGPT, we know ChatGPT is a brand leader, right? It completely dominates the brand market for large language models. 80% of my students or the sample was 100 out of 400, it's 25%. Sorry, 500 is 20%, which is not bad for this type of thing. 80% using ChatGPT, 50% using Notebook LM. This was new to me. Right? So this is kind of remarkable. So the sort of things, small questions I would ask is why Notebook LM, right? Why are students in this class? Sociology 242, why are they using Notebook LM particularly? Why does it outrank things like Quillbot and Grammarly and even Gemini and Copilot, the other large LLMs? How, and crucially, how, to what extent is this changing how students learn and operate, particularly at undergraduate level, right? This is an undergraduate class. How does it change the way we operate in my department, in my faculty, right? And Stellenbosch University, what does it say about Stellenbosch University? Thinking slightly larger, I'm still thinking, why Notebook LLM? But I'm not simply interested in the tool, okay? Because this is not simply a tool. Who owns this tool, right? It's Google. So what? Okay, I have to answer that question. How do I, as a sociologist, think about the use of this tool more broadly within, say, my areas of expertise, my fields, my discipline, sociology? How do I, as a sociologist, think about the emerging ethics, politics, economics of this use? And I put those words, ethics, politics, economics, together because I think very often ethics can be interpreted as sort of performing ethically, doing the right thing, but I think a lot of ethics people know this. It's not simply about individual behavior. It's about situating yourselves within wider domains, within wider fields of politics and economics. So, I'll end with my last slide. This brings me to sort of really some of the things that really concern me about emerging debates on AI literacy. And that is the kind of the key ideological aspects and underpinning, what I would call the emerging political economy of AI are not recognized and often deliberately not considered. And I'll just focus on three things that I'm very interested in. Firstly is, what is it? What is the kind of political economy that the university is increasingly having to adapt to? Okay, and it's what I would call state platform capitalism. It's essentially kind of quasi-Cold War emerging between US and China as not just the two largest economies, but the two largest economies that are kind of carving up the market for AI technology generally, but the current wave of AI in particular, the large language models. AI is framed as progress in intelligence rather than power. Okay. So one key book that is influencing me, I've been reading quite a few books on AI recently, and this one, Power and Progress by Acemoglu and Johnson, is one that I found really, really interesting. For those of you who don't know, this is what I call the third Nobel Prize for AI. You may know that there were two very celebrated Nobel Prizes that went to sort of AI use in various forms last year. The first, they both involved sort of trio, 2 or 3 groups of people, but to put it simply, Geoffrey Hinton, one of the so-called godfathers of AI, won the Nobel Prize for physics for foundational work on deep learning, and Demisa Sibis, okay, won the Nobel Prize for chemistry for more applied work in protein structures. So, those were the celebrated sort of well-known Nobel Prizes for AI. And this is the kind of the unofficial, what I consider to be the unofficial Nobel Prize for AI. It sort of wasn't framed as a prize for AI, but they wrote this book. They didn't actually get the prize for this book, but this builds on their previous work. And a large part of this book does look at artificial intelligence. One of it is this tendency to sort of frame technology in terms not just of progress, okay, but progress framed in terms of a kind of generalized what they call bandwagon effect. Everybody benefits, right? And they show quite clearly, going back to the building of cathedrals in Europe, how this is not the case. In terms of technology generally, but specifically in terms of artificial intelligence, they, I know they coined this term, but they use this term, our current direction of technology, okay? And the current direction of technology is essentially towards automation, okay? And it's moving excessively towards automation, surveillance, data collection, and advertising. And I think this is ideologically significant because I think this is one of the key issues, ideological issues, that kind of hides behind this use of the term AI literacy, okay? As a kind of market phenomenon, it gets framed as you need to equip yourself with AI, okay? So you need to augment yourself, okay? People who don't augment themselves, companies that don't augment their work, universities that don't augment their research and their teaching with AI will fall behind, right? Now, maybe, I'm no doubting there will be a lot of augmentation, okay? But Acemoglu and Johnson argue that the general direction of technology, certainly for the last 30 years or so, has been towards automation. And the general intent, certainly in the West, behind AI is more towards automation than augmentation, I would argue. And I think that has serious risks for the university, which I'm going to develop in another presentation. And I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Yeah. That was a lot for
Sorry.
for my mind to grasp, because it's like you are rushing at a speed
I know, I'm
there's
sorry.
so many tensions that you are making us think about. So earlier this morning, actually, in our department, what are we, our center or division talks, we were also asking some of those questions to say, have we thought deeply about, the incoming of AI in our universities and what that means, for the universities in future in terms of knowledge and student knowing. So I see that there's a lot of hands. I think Prof. Arnold, were you clapping or was that a hand?
It was a clap.
All right, Delene, I saw your hand as well.
Sorry, so mine was also a clap.
Okay, Andrew, yours is still standing.
Yeah, mine wasn't. I mean, I wanted to clap, but it wasn't just a clap. Yeah, very interesting points that you made. I just wanted to maybe poke at something. You said that there's quite a pronounced use of notebook LM, and you say you're in the arts, Lloyd.
Yes, well, I'm in sociology, humanities, yeah.
Humanities.
We have three divisions. We have arts, we have languages, and we have social sciences. So I'm a social scientist.
Okay. I'm just thinking that it doesn't surprise me that they're using a lot of notebook LM, because notebook LM is really useful for using specific or curated references to form an argument. Whereas using ChatGPT is generally more prone to hallucinations and other nonsense that creeps in. So it may indicate that students want their assignments or essays or whatever they're handing in to be based on sound content rather than potentially hallucinated nonsense, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, they're still outsourcing their critical thinking to AI, which isn't a good thing. But it was interesting to note that in engineering, for example, I barely come across anyone who uses notebook LM because we don't generally do the same volume of written, language-based assignments and that sort of thing.
Yes, I mean, this is part of the wider project that I'm running, and I've got qualitative responses from the students, 100 of them, which I haven't looked at. I've just pulled out the sort of the easily consumable quantitative data to show this. I don't know what the kind of justifications are, although I did discuss the preliminary results in one of my lectures, and I got this, I think, and I agree with you. That's one aspect of it. One aspect of it is that it does make more responsible use of, seems to me the notebook LL does make more responsible use of a kind of a given corpus of literature than ChatGPT will. There's also the crucial aspect in the humanities is it's turning these things into podcasts. Okay. And that's got me sort of thinking very clearly from a humanities perspective. What does that mean? You're not actually reading the text with your eyes anymore. You're listening to it. Is that a bad thing? I don't completely have my ideas worked out about that now, but that's a big thing. They like to listen to these things out. I give them reading and they want to turn it into a podcast.
Well, that's better than not doing the reading at all, I guess. So that's one step in the right direction, I guess.
It's better than just asking ChatGPT. I agree.
Yeah. Lloyd, Sharon is asking in the chats what you would say are the major risks to universities.
Market capture, put it bluntly. In the West, okay, if we follow too much the Western model, right? Because the Western model is built very much around proprietary AI technology, and you want to capture as much data as possible. That's why they've got all these court cases going on. Data is the essence, right? I just want to make it very clear. I'm not anti-AI. I just think that AI, part of the problem here is that AI is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because AI is a broad category. And the particular, I'm doing another presentation at the Learning Conference next year. I'm going to draw out this kind of political economy aspects more interesting. But the particular risk are large language models. Okay, and there the problem is not the technology. Well, the technology is a reason for a problem for another area that was oversold. I just don't think it's good as people think it is. But the problem is the data. Right, these companies basically have to steal data from the internet and from book companies. Right, got all these court cases from artists, from newspapers. Well, the New York Times is suing them now because there's various sort of examples where they literally take verbatim. These models take verbatim stuff from the New York Times. So, I think we have to think very carefully about our formalized knowledge in the form of, data, and do we just hand it over to these big corporations? That's the main thing I'm worried about.
Okay, I think Elizabeth has something to say, but before that, can you please stop sharing, because now it shows the rest of the participants, right?
Oh, I'll stop sharing. All right, stop
Yes.
sharing. Is that better?
Yes. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, you can go ahead.
I just first wanted to say, I'll introduce myself. So my name's Elizabeth, and I'm one of the faculty librarians here at Stellenbosch. And we work obviously quite a lot with AI and the tools and everything. And I've done a lot of my own reading up and everything on it. So the first thing is just I want to say thank you for a very, very, you say, you're still working it out, but it is genuinely quite a reflective, an accurate reflection of where everything stands at the moment, because even in terms of the AI literacies, the literature, every field is claiming that each field has their own AI literacy. There's no consensus on really what's going on, and there's no real thought. It's a little bit of a scramble. So exactly what you said, all of this is just, I think a lot of the times, I think we're just confusing adding on literacies for the sake of adding on literacies and not looking at what is already underlying. What are you saying you want them to actually be able to do? And so that is something that we have also. And then also just we work on the back end of a lot of information resources, and we've seen from the publisher's side, they have gone straight into exclusive licensing agreements with their information, and even going so far as to license their metadata out. So they are selling their data, and they are asking authors. Some authors are not given the option to opt in. Their metadata and data is sold without their consent. And that's also why there are court cases against companies like Routledge and so on for doing that. But the big thing is that the data, and it's not even the full text article data anymore, even the metadata is now a new gold mine. And this is something that is not often also thought of in the affordances of the tools, because as you're having data fragmented, you're having different tools have different information in them, which leads back to the situation that we have with academic databases. There is no one database that contains everything. And why? Because business. Everyone wants to sell you their own product. So it is, at the end of the day, there is a kind of an ethical question behind these data acquirings. And we know, despite what the US courts are saying, a lot of this doesn't feel right ethically, and it doesn't feel right morally, despite it perhaps being seen as legally okay. So I think this is something that students are not always aware of going on in the backgrounds, and also academics are maybe not also aware of everything that's going on in the backgrounds, that there's a real morality aspect to these tools as well. And you can say you want to have students use AI, but if you have a student that objects based on moral and ethical grounds for more than just the business practices around the exploitation and all of the other issues around it, should we actually as an institution force students to use an AI tool if they feel it goes against their ethics and morals? Because that is a big question for me at this point. If a student says, well, I'm a full environmentalist, I'm against all of the environmental degradation that's happening because of the AI tools and the data centers and the water use and all the rest of it, should we then say, well, this module requires it, you have to, sorry for your own stance, but we're forcing you to use it. So I think that's a real ethical question around these tools. It's not just as simple as it's a tool. It's really quite complex once you start digging. But I just wanted to say thank you. This has been a brilliant talk. It is very much in my interest field, as you can perhaps tell. So I might contact you offline just for a chat further.
I'd like that. I'm not going to comment much about what you say, but I think it's very valuable. I actually think I need to talk more to you, because I don't fully understand this, and I need to, in terms of my research, I want to understand more about the kind of the actual library and journal acquisition aspects of this. I don't understand it, but I'd love to talk to you more. So let's get in touch.
We also have. Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Prof. Arnold.
Hey, Lloyd.
There you go.
Thanks very much. Actually, my thoughts are slightly disconnected here. The first thing I just wanted to say is, I mean, what I'm seeing in my courses is also obviously an increase in the AI usage, dramatically in chemistry. I mean, I ran a survey with my class, so I got about 600 responses. So only like 10 out of that was 2% said that they never use any AI. Whereas half of them say that they use it occasionally and that sort of thing. So it's quite it's certainly the students are, for all intents and purposes, all using AI, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
And I've got a lot of kind of responses and stuff like that. But the thing that I've been kind of, as you started to speak, the thing that really started to that occurred to me was this question of, the internet's important, right? Google is important. Being able to find information on the internet is an important skill. And yet, at the university, I'm not aware of anywhere that you taught on how to access information on the internet. It's almost just assumed that, students have figured this out. And in chemistry, I mean, there are some tools that we kind of get to, but to be honest, those tools only start really making themselves known around third year and into honors. Otherwise, at sort of the undergrad level, it's very very basic. And I'm wondering with like the questions with like the AI tools that are out there, when it was said that at Stellenbosch University, we're supposed to become competent and we've got to be able to use these things, where in the university do we teach this, and do we actually have to teach it? Is it something that's not really necessary to teach? Because in the same way that students know about how to use the internet, how to search, how to get information, we do very little. I mean, I'm saying what I know. We do very little in terms of telling students, don't go to this site, don't go do this, don't do this, don't do that, we just say, yeah, go and find the information, go and watch YouTube. If it says anything that's counter to what we've taught you, it's probably wrong, so don't listen to it. But, so I just don't know how, like, what our responsibility is at the university in terms of this, because I'm just kind of connecting it with like how we deal with the internet, and isn't it the same sort of types of questions?
I mean, yeah, in a way it is. I say the problem with the internet, and AI presents a particular issue for the internet, right? I mean, you may or may not be aware of this, but there have been serious debates about, the kind of the potential impact of AI on the internet, and how, actually Google woke up to this very recently, right? There's these kind of AI overlays that they do whenever you do a search now, right? And a lot of people were writing that's basically kill Google, right? Because what is the business model of the internet? It's pay per click, and if AI is basically just giving you a summary, there's no more pay per click. That's the end of the internet as we know it. But I would sort of, my critical sort of comes out here, is that such a bad thing? Okay, because I think what people don't really fully understand is the extent to which our common sense understanding of the internet is a Google framed idea of the internet, right? So Google did not just invent a search engine, right? In a very real sense, Google created the internet.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is why I'm critical of LLM. I'm saying it's not just a tool, right? It's owned by Google. Why is Google significant? I think Google is going to be around another 10 years. OpenAI, ChatGPT probably won't be. Okay. Because why is Google so strong now? Because it's sitting on all this data. Okay. And it's data taken from the public domains. So, we have to defend public knowledge. That's for me, if you want to distill the essence of the problem here from a university perspective. It's the universities as domains of public knowledge. We have a history, and the internet is one manifestation of this, where basically internet was a public creation, right? It was created by ARPANET, it was all public project, and then in the 90s it got privatized. And when what's his name, Berners-Lee, right, saw it as this big public center model of hypertext built on CERN, which was a public institution in the US, but no. when hypertext really becomes the kind of baseline language of the universe, how do you search it? The first company that really comes up with an efficient way of searching the internet, in a sense, creates a new internet, and there's a paradox there. Okay, and so we might actually see that AI is kind of breaking that business model of the internet. But what comes next? I don't know.
I've just had a thought. I mean, what's going to come next is that it's actually going to be so much more nefarious because, well, potentially it depends on your viewpoint. But like at the moment when we do search, what we want the clicks and we want the adverts, right? Now. The answer, the large language model is going to get to know you, and it's going to put those adverts very subtly in. It's like, oh, by the way, you should really consider going to this X and X place to go and purchase your meal that you're feeling hungry. You know what I mean? It's going to be, when we're trying to get information, we're going to be bombarded with this extra stuff. It's going to be very interesting. Thanks.
My short answer is I think the internet is fragmenting. We think of the internet as one thing, Evgeny Morozov is a big kind of tech writer on this. He argues, the internet is never one thing, but we think of the internet as one thing because it is historically so centered on the US and technologies associated with US corporations. But essentially, it's fragmenting now. There are half a dozen countries in the world, like Ethiopia, got a PhD student. They turn off the internet, right? It's highly centralized. China is already a walled internet garden kind of thing. I think we're going to see more of it. Anyway, that's another whole kettle of fish.
Right.
We'll talk individually about this.
Thanks, dude.
Sure. Thanks for that question, Prof. Before I go to Joseph and Angela, there is a comment in the comment section from Gray. He says, we provide training to public sector officials in AI tools and applications of AI in the public sector. What would you say this broadened view of AI literacies would mean for public sector officials who are seeking to augment or automate their work?
Sure. I don't know. I'd have to know more about your context to answer that question. I'd say more generally, I would say to the public sector, I would probably give the same message that I give to you. I mean, universities are part of the public sector, right? In my vision of the universities are in the public sector, which makes it complicated is third stream funding, right? So third stream funding gives big research universities like Stellenbosch a kind of sense in which we go beyond the public domain because we have to get this other money, it's not state money sort of thing. But the ethics of my approach is protect the kind of the public sector, and that doesn't mean not using AI, but just thinking about how you're using it and implementing it in public domains. Be very careful about where data goes, for example. Don't let private companies just build themselves off the back of your public data. That's that I feel quite passionate about.
Yeah. Joseph?
Thank you very much, Sim, and thank you very much, Prof, for the very interesting introduction to the social and political aspects of AI. I think as you correctly said, most of us have been thinking about AI as a skill. It's something that you need to have, but we have not actually considered the political implications of AI. Would you then maybe then suggest that the way that we as Stellenbosch University have framed AI in our policy documents perhaps may need to be changed so that we are clear that there is a political aspect to AI. So that's the first thing. Then secondly, I've been here at Stellenbosch for almost for over a year now. And I've had talks about AI and AI literacy, but there does not seem to be a particular push to have a formalized AI curriculum and to make it, I'm afraid to say, compulsory for students to be AI literate. I think, as you said, there is perhaps a moral obligation for us to ensure that students are literate when it comes to AI. But it seems as if we are perhaps behind the curve, and you know, by the time you wake up, and the students might have the incorrect you know, understanding of AI and probably might not use it as we want them to use. I think those are the two aspects. My last one is to say perhaps one of the challenges that we're facing with AI is that normally when we talk about literacy, right, you're talking about a practice that is already established. You know what I mean? So if I'm teaching somebody academic literacy, there is a historical practice called writing and reading and writing in a particular context. But with AI, because it's such a new emerging phenomenon, perhaps it's not easy for us to say this is the practice that is established in AI. So therefore, it's not easy for us to conceptualize AI literacy as a particular professional expertise. So I think those are my three points. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joseph. Thanks for that. Yeah, okay. Firstly, on the Stellenbosch AI policy. Well, look, I actually think Stellenbosch has done pretty well so far. I think the fact that it's a position statement, and I've interviewed somebody in the management to get a sense of what this means, and it seems to mean that position statement is kind of not a policy. It's not a clearly written in stone type position. It's there to kind of guide the ongoing evolution or development of real policies in a number of domains. And I think that's a good thing, and I would probably caution against trying to do too much of the type of things I'm concerned about, developing critical AI literacy at a administrative level. I think there are limits to what you can do at that level. Actually, I'd be much more worried about overreach in trying to formulate a sort of one-size-fits-all AI policy at the university. So I think Stellenbosch has been quite cautious around that, and I think that's good. And for the same reason, critical literacies would tend to sort of mitigate against this idea that you need a single formalized AI curriculum, right? Because it seems AI is obviously one thing that needs to be trained. Okay, and I think that is a market imperative. Okay, it's not an academic imperative from my perspective. Critical literacy basically means thinking where to use what and why, and maybe why not. Okay, so it's very specific. Okay, I wouldn't presume to tell a chemist or a physicist how to bring AI into their teaching as a sociologist. So why should a senior manager try to do that? I would say, I think the problem with literacy more general is, we have this idea that literacy is something that practice already kind of clearly already established. What was the framing? I think the reality is it's not, right? And this is where it gets really political, because if you think, you have to talk a little bit about languages, which I haven't done. Okay, but if language skills, language technologies, on the one hand, we have language professionals who have very definite skills, but on the other hand, the kind of competencies that we associate with language are not uniform across the world. Okay. And, if we accept that literacy involves a lot more than simply coding and decoding, but writing in a particular language, then we have to recognize that no, most countries in the world, these are not already established. Okay, and that's one of the essence of inequality in any context is the extent to which literacy, even basic literacy, is not already established in most people. So I think even basic literacy, reading to write, is not as different, not that different to the kind of skills associated with AI now. And also the kind of sensitivities that people like Pierre Bourdieu developed in his studies of universities, that, a lot of the education is kind of prior to the formal schooling system. It comes from elite families, and that the same thing is happening with AI. Right? My kids don't have cell phones, but my gosh, they're playing with my cell phone, right? So what advantage does that give them over kids in a township that don't have parents with a cell phone, who don't get access to a cell phone at all, sort of thing. These little subtle things that happen in the family and kind of more middle class families, as opposed to, it's not really established. So I don't think AI literacy is that different from the sort of issues we've had with literacy at the basic level, more generally.
Yeah. And I think another point that Andrew is raising in the chats is the university processes versus in terms of, curriculum or syllabus. development and the fast pace at which AI is being developed. So yeah, we may not perhaps be able to keep
that's
up.
a problem. But that creates this urgency. We've got to keep up. We've got to keep up, but we've got to resist it because a lot of that is hype.
Yes, Angela, you are going to be the last person, and then we will wrap up.
Kisum. Hi, Prof. Lloyd. This is Angela Governor. I'm from the Language Centre, as you talked about, language specialists, but actually I'm the head of academic and professional literacies. So there's a lot to speak to you about, but I know we have very few minutes left. I was quite struck by, and you didn't have a lot of time for this, you talked about intelligence versus power, instead of power, and you talked about augmentation versus automation. And you mentioned Stellenbosch University. You said it's more, it is quite present that we're moving towards automation rather than augmentation. I just wanted you to expand on that. Have I heard incorrectly? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I meant it that literally. Okay. No, actually, I don't know what Stellenbosch is doing at the moment. We've got a new pro vice chancellor for quantum computing and artificial intelligence. It's all very new. We've got a new vice chancellor, so I really don't know what we're doing clearly. And I've got no sense that Stellenbosch is rushing down this road faster than other universities. I'm researching it now as well. I also have to be careful, and I'm trying to work out what's going on. Now, I was talking much more generally. I think. Yeah, this is a big issue. I want to start writing on. I'll probably say more about it in my next presentation at the conference next week. But I think this is a big risk. There is this tendency to sort of frame artificial intelligence as frame. It's really the issue is framing machine learning, which is really the technology, as intelligence, as artificial intelligence. There was a kind of ideological move that was made. And I think I read a recent book now that argues that move was made at Meta, okay, to not keep, obviously the technology here is you have a research tradition, artificial intelligence on the one hand, machine learning on the other. They're quite distinct for 40, 50 years. And then really what happens is machine learning wins around about 2012. But machine learning gets relabeled as AI, right, as intelligence. That is an ideological move. It was made, and it was made at Meta. I think, Jan LeCun, I like Jan LeCun. For me, Jan LeCun is one of the kind of, the more smarter sort of the godfathers. He's my favorite godfather of AI to some extent, but he was there, and he was part of this sort of thing. And I think it frames this issue as intelligence, and you've got all these fears about superintelligence, which is another, bogus, ideological bogus, really. It's a way of thinking, particularly in the West, of catching the attention of people in the West, of scaring you into, sort of going with the flow and just realizing what a revolutionary technology this is. And I think it's a problem for the university because we suck that up. We think we're intelligent. We like the idea that, we're gonna use something that's going to make us smarter and it's going to add to our overall contribution to intelligence. But I think the intelligence framing is problematic. There's a lot to this. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, no problem. We'll have a conversation for another day then. I'd
love to chat to you more about this as well. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I want to comment on the AI literacy course because and whether we are doing anything at Stellenbosch. We are actually in academic literacy courses. We piloted something in science in context with all natural science students this year, where we gave them examples, first years, and we talked about how to use AI, what is AI about, the tools, how to use it critically, responsibly, and ethically. And we gave students experiments with it. We piloted this year, and we're hopefully going to roll some of that out in, further into student success projects, but also in other academic literacy modules. But I would argue it's not just an academic literacy problem, or it's everybody's. It should be integrated everywhere, just as we've integrated the use of the internet, Microsoft Suite, all of those things. We need to integrate it and we need to use it. And show students how to use it smartly or not use it, as someone said.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No,
that's my spiel for now.
I didn't mean to suggest that the good work is not being done in centres like yours. The key point just that academic literally means thinking AI from your position in the academic structure. And I think no auxiliary support service can really do that. We need to do that as academics.
No problem. I was answering somebody else's note on it, but
okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Prof.
No, thank you so much, Angela. And please do share the findings or what you worked on that pilot, perhaps to the rest of the Stellenbosch community. Colleagues, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Llyod Hill, for such a thought-provoking conversation. You have helped us end our last Auxin on such a high note. So thank you so much for that. And colleagues, thank you for always engaging in the conversations, in the chats, and to Dr. Hill. And like he said, if you want to continue the conversation, next week we have our SU SOTL conference, and I have seen a couple of presentations that are looking into AI literacies. So the conversation can continue there. Otherwise, from me, I have to say, and maybe thank you for participating this entire year. I wish you all the best for the last stretch of the year as you'll be looking into exams. Yeah, we will see each other in 2026. Otherwise, I will see you at SOTL and other division activities in the year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.